We are all created equal. A fine sentiment, but ultimately a lie. One of history's greatest at that. A single, simple sentence that deceives on two fronts. The first is to say that we are created when we are in fact evolved. The second is a function of the first. For evolution is premised upon inequality. As such, no products of the evolutionary process are equal. Allow me to substantiate. Evolution can only take place when a given quality differs from individual to individual relative to a given species. This is known as trait variation. Let's look at our own species. Take whatever trait you'd like. Height, strength, intelligence, speed, creativity. From these, make a group of 100 and rank order the members of our group, from least to greatest in accordance with a given trait. There might be times when individuals appear to be the same, that is to say, equal. Such instances do not mean that the individuals in question are equal relative to that trait, but rather that we've not been sufficiently discriminating. Let's take height as an instance and say that, when we measure in centimeters, there are two individuals with identical values. Fortunately, there is another unit at our disposal, the millimeter. If that's not enough, then try micrometers, a millionth of a meter, nanometers, a billionth, 10 to the negative 9, picometers, 10 to the negative 12, femtometers, 10 to the negative 15, attometers, 10 to the negative 18. It had better happen at the zeptometer, 10 to the negative 21, because that is our practical limit of measure. Let's wave a magic wand over our technology, breaking past the practical and falling into the world of theory. What awaits would be the octometer, 10 to the negative 24, then the rontometer, 10 to the negative 27, and finally the quectometer, 10 to the negative 30. I say finally not because we've reached the smallest possible unit, but rather that this is the smallest official SI unit. If you were godlike and had the gift of the all-sight, called omniscience, you would be able to discriminate to the smallest distance possible in this universe. That would be the Planck length, roughly 1.6 times 10 to the negative 35 meters. Surely you would find inequality at that level. There is no law of nature that guarantees that you will. The possibility is negligibly trifling, but let us grant it and move on to another trait, say mass. Would the highly improbable happen again? Let's grant that and try a third trait, speed. Does heaven still hate us? Possibility being what it is, given enough opportunity, such a thing might happen, but surely not from a mere 110 billion humans, the grand total of our species. An impressive number, no doubt, but one of only 11 orders of magnitude. This would outclass a system of 35 orders? Not once, not twice, but 3 times? Never mind the myriad traits that have gone without mention. This is so unlikely as to be impossible. We have never so much as seen twins that are entirely identical. At the very least, one is always paler for having lived in the other's shadow. Splitting hairs is positively magnanimous in comparison to what we've just done, but it gets the point across, no? In extreme cases, the differences might be minuscule, but they are there nevertheless. If things are not exactly the same, then they are not equal. Differences are not typically so small that we need hadron colliders in order to smash them out, but since we've brought the heavy artillery, we might as well use it. In order for life to be, there must be cells, which require proteins, which require molecules, which require atoms, which are not evenly spread across the cosmos. Instead, they are accreted in little pockets throughout a vast emptiness. We live in such a pocket, and we call it the solar system. The ultra majority of atoms in it have been glutted by the sun. That's why it constitutes over 99% of the system's mass. The Earth makes up around a measly 0.0003%. We could take this principle even further back in time. The atoms from which our system is made were once part of another star. This was a gigantic beast made almost entirely of hydrogen and helium, with little bits of lithium and beryllium. Stars of this sort are themselves accretions that deprive the rest of the cosmos access to the atoms within them, by so doing creating the fusion conditions required to bake the elements from which all in the cosmos is made, all including us. Had it not been for the inequality of atomic distribution, then there wouldn't be any atoms bigger than beryllium with an atomic number of 4. No oxygen, no carbon, no earth, no life, no man. At least, not without inequality. Frankly, without inequality, not even the atoms would exist. Contrary to their etymology from the Greek atomos, meaning indivisible, atoms are quite divisible. They are made of quarks and electrons, the elementary particles from which all matter in our universe is constituted. We are told that there are roughly 10 to the 90 of these particles. Let's put this number into perspective. Earth has around 7.5 times 10 to the 18 grains of sand. If each of these grains were to become an Earth of its own, and each Earth had the same amount of sand, focusing on the orders of magnitude, would mean that we have around 10 to the 37 grains of sand. Repeat the cycle. Give each grain an Earth of its own, and count the grains once more, and you would have 10 to the 74 grains in total. Stupendous as this number is, it is still 16 orders of magnitude short, which means that for every grain of sand in this nested world of ours, there would still be 10 quadrillion elementary particles. This astonishing number, 10 to the 90, is itself a fraction, around a billionth of what could have been had there not been an elementary particle culling of cosmic proportion. You see, within a microsecond of the Big Bang, there had taken place an event that we can call the asymmetric annihilation. It was the product of matter and antimatter clashing, one against the other, forsaking their mass and returning it to the cosmos in the form of energy. Had there been equal amounts of matter and antimatter, then this annihilation would have ended the story of existence before it even began. Fortunately for those of us that like to be, and like that other things are, inequality came to the rescue and ensured that there was slightly more matter than there was antimatter. For every 1 billion units of antimatter, there were 1,000,000,001 units of matter. Slight as this difference was, it was pivotal and decisive. Matter inherited the cosmos. Although it did not multiply, it set the terms for existence as we know it. And so we see that inequality is far from some aberration, but rather a metaphysical trait of existence itself. We find it in all domains and categories, from organisms to elementary particles. With this in mind, we should not be surprised when we find it. Rather, we should be dubious when it fails to find us. That doesn't mean that inequality is right. Up until now, it's been an amoral consideration. Let us not forget to make that most fundamental philosophical distinctions, that between what is and what ought to be. It's quite easy to make that distinction when we're not dealing with anything too close to the human condition. This has mostly been the case up until now. We're about to make a bit of a transition and look at inequality as it manifests itself in a fascinating and controversial subject, the sexual marketplace. Before we address this at a human level, let's get an overview of the mating strategies in the animal kingdom. Let's begin with a familiar one, monogamy. This is when organisms pair up until death do them part, which happens rather frequently in that accursed thing called the food chain. A classic example of this strategy can be found among swans. On the other side of the spectrum, we have a strategy called polygonandry, a consensual variation of the now infamous Diddy party. Here, males and females freely give of themselves to other males and females, creating a bisexual, free-loving, hippie cluster harem. Bonobos are a perfect example of this. We also have another set of strategies which are not so egalitarian. These would be variations of what we call polygamy. It has two variations, one for each sex. Polyandry. This is one female, several males, practiced by green anacondas. And polygyny. One male, several females. Lions will be our example of this strategy. Going forward, let's place our focus upon polygyny. One male, several females, because it is the most common mating system. Claude tells me that around 40 to 60% of animals are polygynous. Things get even more decisive when looking at mammals, where an astonishing 95% of this hairy, warm-blooded, milk-suckling class reproduce via this strategy. As exceptional as man tends to be, we are no exception on this front. We too are a polygynous species by nature. But man's nature is to be unnatural, and so we are quite capable of reproducing all the other mating systems. This when material and cultural conditions either insist or allow. There are those who stick to the way of our deep ancestry, practicing polygyny, the most prominent in my country of South Africa being the Zulu, who call it istembu. We've seen a hedonistic vanguard getting in touch with their inner bonobo and forming polycules, where males and females form a mutually intimate harem and share each other's company, calling it polyamory, the love of many. We even have instances of polyandry. There are Tibetan cultures that practice a form of polyandry, where one woman takes several husbands, typically two, usually brothers. That said, the rest of the world, at least 85% of us, practices monogamy in some or other form, from serial monogamy or until the dying romance of an expired life contract. Societies all around the world have forsaken polygamy in order to take on a one-to-one pairing. Why did this happen? Because monogamy is the most socially stable union. Why is that? Because males are competitive, sometimes destructively so. In order to see what polygyny can do to a people, let us consider a scenario. Imagine a group of people, the Alaphites, who are 100 in number, with a 50-50 split between the sexes, 50 men, 50 women. The Alaphites are an aggressively heterosexual people. As such, things are going to be very heteronormative. Furthermore, in order to keep things simple, we'll give them a Mormon mating ratio, meaning that each married man gets 2 wives. This leaves 25 men without a partner. Hot-blooded as they are, no Alaphite man would accept such a position. As such, there is fierce competition for mating opportunities. It starts off in a perfectly healthy fashion, with the boys demonstrating their value via various masculine feats of strength, stamina, and skill, doing their damnedest in the hunt, honing their charm, practicing their sweet talk. Some learn to sing, others how to dance. Some conceive of strange new devices called musical instruments, and use them to pluck the heartstrings of their would-be suitors. Regardless, the dust of honest competition settles. There are 25 young men without partners, 25 young men with no reproductive futures, 25 young men that'll see their lines extinguished. Unless, of course, they forsook honest competition. Realizing that they might use coercion as a means of attaining their heart's desire, they take up their spears and use them against other men as a means of thinning out the competition, some of them even going so far as to wield force to trespass against the sacrament of choice. It doesn't take too long for the Alaphites to become a dysfunctional society, plagued by gratuitous violence and unnecessary deaths. As their numbers reduce, they are less able to provide for themselves, less able to defend for themselves. They are vulnerable, easy pickings for predators and other tribes. One such tribe would be the Betaphites, a people that began with the same initial conditions as the Alaphites. However, from amongst them there was a wise and charismatic figure who realized that his people were imperiled by inequality and the violence it encouraged. He moved to change this by innovating a system that would encourage healthy competition. Men would still vie for mating opportunities. The top contenders would win the most desirable partners without hoarding them as before, thus allowing lesser men to take consolation, in so doing preserving the Betavite race from destruction. And so, with an appeal to the gods, he persuades the Betavites that the thing to do would be for each man to take a single woman, ensuring that every man had a woman, and thus a reproductive future. I know, it's terribly androcentric, but such is patriarchy. And so the Betavites adopted this new way. It did them well, for it allowed them to be fruitful and to multiply, providing for themselves and expanding their numbers until they found themselves in need of more land and more resources. Looking to expand, they cast their gaze into the ocean that was the world, there to feel the nibble of a choice piece of land. It was well watered, green with pastures, bushes bursting with vegetables, branches heavy with fruit, fields teeming with herd upon herd of choice game. However, this is not a land without a people for this people who so hungered for land. It was indeed the land of the Alaphites. Driven by the urge to expand, the Betavites did a quick reckoning. They were well fed, the Alaphites were starving. They were tall, the Alaphites were short. They were many, the Alaphites were few. They were strong, and the Alaphites were weak. By the end of their calculus, the Betavite males were compelled by a powerful instinct. Woe betide the weak, they said, as they fell upon the Alaphites. From here, our story briefly splits in two, only to converge upon the same ending. The first version of the story sees the Betavites turn totally genocidal, wiping out the Alaphites, man, woman, and child. In the second version, they kill all the men and their children and rationalize their way into taking the women, not as wives, but as servants and concubines. One way or another, monogamy spreads. The Betavites fill the land. Now let's say that there is another people, the Gamaphites. They catch word of what had happened, how the Betavites changed their mating customs, by so doing grew strong, and using this strength to annihilate the Alaphites. The Gamaphites were concerned, for the Betavites would surely continue to grow in strength and in number. Once again they would seek expansion. What if the Gamaphites were next to see oblivion? Perish the thought, they said, and adopted this new thing called monogamy. They too grew strong, and in their strength warded off the threat of Betavite invasion. So strong, in fact, that they were no longer fearful. No longer were they prey. Now they were hunters, who turned their ravenous eyes upon the land of the Deltaphites. You know the rest. Necessity bred meme. Meme bred genes. Genes spread the memes. This process took place all over the world. Whether by innovation or conquest or independent adoption, mankind became a predominantly monogamous species. However, it was always a strained arrangement, with fidelity proving difficult to maintain, especially for high-quality males. This strain seems to be approaching fracture in this, our modern world. It seems to me as though material and cultural conditions are rife and ready for man's return to something more ancestral. That said, the scales of my interest are tipping. Digging too deep might exhaust my curiosity entirely, so allow me to recharge and leave that thought for another day.